find all the solutions of this equation by factoring, right? In order to do that, we're going to have to use what we call the zero factor property, or sometimes it's referred to as the zero product property. And both could be proper to name this property. Here's why. If a times b equals 0, then we know that a must be 0, or b must be 0, or possibly both. In other words, if the product, here's a product of 0, if you have two things multiplied together and they equal a product of 0, then it must be true that at least one of the factors must also be 0. So we're going to apply that here. But here's the thing. The property says if a times b equals 0. So what we need to first do is set this equation equal to 0 before we try to factor it out. So we're going to subtract 15 from both sides. So then we have 4s squared minus 17s minus 15 equals 0. Now we're ready to start factoring. So we're going to try to come up with a double bubble. And if these two things being multiplied equal 0, then at least one of them would have to be equal to 0. So we're going to find those solutions by setting each of those factors equal to 0. So this requires a review of factoring quadratic polynomials. Now I like to use the AC method, which is where you multiply the coefficient in front of the squared term. So that's 4 times c, which is negative 15, and you'll get negative 60. Then you try to find a factor pair that will give you a product of negative 60, but will give you a sum of the middle term coefficient, negative 17. So there's different ways you can approach this. You can just think of different things, pairs that multiply to negative 60 off the top of your head, or you can be more methodical and start with something like 1 times negative 60. And that would give us a sum. If you added those together, you would get negative 59. Now notice that I made my 60 the negative in that because I know I'm looking for a negative sum, which means the larger number is going to have to be negative. Okay, so that factor pair did not get the result I was looking for. So let's try another. How about 2 times negative 30? And that'll give me negative 28 when I add those together. So that didn't work either. How about 4 times negative, what? Negative 15? Did I skip something? Because this gives me a difference or a sum of negative 11. And I needed negative 17. I skipped right over that. So maybe I should have tried 3 before I went on to 4. That would be more methodical. 1, 2, 3, then 4. So 3 times negative 20, that will give me negative 17. So this is the factor pair that I want. So you take the factor pair, and instead of hopping right down to your double bubble, you're first going to take the middle term here and just separate it into two terms using that factor pairing. So negative 20 plus 3, right? So I'm going to do negative 20s plus 3s. So I'm just rewriting it as a sum of those two numbers with the s attached, of course, because I don't want to forget about my s. Then I will bring down the negative 15, bring down the 4s squared, make sure I make those look like s's and not 5s. And now I can factor by grouping. So I'm going to pair up these and pair up these and see what I can factor out from each pair that's common. From the first two terms, I can factor out 4s, and that would leave inside s minus 5. From the second pairing, I can factor out a 3, and that will leave s minus 5. And then I still have the equals 0 over there on the side. And now I see that I have a matching set of parentheses, and I can factor that out as a common term, and that leaves 4s plus 3 in a second set of parentheses. So that's the factoring part of it. Now I apply the zero factor property. So I have two things being multiplied that equal 0, a product of 0. So that means that each factor could be equal to 0. So I'm going to set s minus 5 equal to 0. And I'm going to say that could be true, or, and this is the inclusive or, because it could be true that they're both a solution, or that they'll both be equal to 0 and produce a solution. Or this might be true. And then we just do your typical solving steps from there. From the first one, we'll add 5 to both sides and get s equals 5 as one solution. And then we can subtract 3 from both sides on this side, and that will give us 4s equals negative 3. And then divide 4 on both sides. So that gives me 4 into 4 equals 1. 1 times s is s. So then I get s equals negative 3/4. So now I have a solution set. And of course, you always want to check your answers by plugging them back into the original equation. But these are my two potential answers right now. And once I verify that they both make the equation true separately when you plug them in, then that would be what I would submit as my answers.